At the age of 79, Barry Gibb leaves many people choked with emotion when they look back on his life's journey, the last man still standing, carrying the entire legacy of the Bee Gees on his shoulders. From the falsetto voice that set the 1970s ablaze, from immortal hits like Stayin' Alive that made the whole world move to the same rhythm, to How Deep Is Your Love, Barry has given humanity hundreds of millions of records and a musical era that will never fade. But few people know that to reach that brilliance, Barry Gibb had to endure a deeply painful journey. From a childhood in which he nearly lost his life, to horrific burns, to years spent one by one bidding farewell to loved ones, and even to moments when the public, the very people who once idolized him, quietly turned their backs. Today, despite possessing enormous wealth and having been knighted by the British Crown, Barry Gibb still lives in a quiet loneliness as age and declining health gradually become challenges that can no longer be avoided. So what losses has Barry Gibb endured throughout his life, and what helped him remain standing after everything? Barry Gibb's life did not begin with applause, but with scars. Born on the 1st of September, 1946, at the Jane Crookall maternity home, he came into the world in a poor but hopeful family. His father, Hugh, was a wandering drummer, playing in seaside hotels and returning at dawn with pockets almost empty. His mother, Barbara, raised the children while bracing herself against days when money ran dangerously low. Barry was the second child after his older sister, Leslie, and in December 1949, the twin brothers Robin and Maurice were born, turning the cramped house into a crowded yet loving home. The first tragedy struck when Barry was not yet 2 years old. In a moment of innocent childhood curiosity, he reached for a kettle of boiling tea. Scalding water poured straight onto his fragile body, and his screams tore through the small room. Barbara rushed forward in panic, her hands burning as she tried to peel away the soaked clothing that had stuck tightly to her son's skin. Hugh scooped Barry up and ran through the pitch-dark streets to Noble Hospital, while Leslie stood frozen behind them, not yet understanding why her little brother had suddenly gone limp in their father's arms. At the hospital, doctors spoke very softly to Barbara, telling her the boy was unlikely to survive. Some even said Barry had only about 20 minutes left to live. Burns covered his chest, arms, and neck. Infection spread rapidly, and the threat of gangrene loomed hour by hour. For more than 2 months afterward, Barbara barely left her son's bedside. Nurses urged her to go home and rest, but she refused, terrified that if she turned her back even for a moment, the child would be gone. At night, Hugh continued playing drums to earn money. During the day, he sat silently by the bed, watching his son struggle for breath, afraid to touch him too firmly. The entire family was pushed to the very edge of fear, living on the fragile boundary between life and death. Yet somehow, that tiny boy clung fiercely to life and survived. When Barry was finally brought home, the family treated him as though the slightest bump might cause him to shatter. Barbara kissed every red scar on her son's skin. Leslie brought toys just to see him smile, and Hugh tapped out gentle rhythms beside the bed each night, as if rocking him to sleep through sound. Across Barry's chest and arms, his skin had tightened into rough patches, long scars stretching like permanent reminders of the flames that had once tried to consume him. Years later, Barry confided, "I don't remember the hospital. I only remember the scars because they remind me that I'm alive, thanks to my family." But fate was not finished with him. When Barry was 4 years old, another incident occurred. A strange man approached him and behaved in ways that terrified the child, forcing the police to intervene. Barry, still just a young boy, had to describe what happened using words far beyond his age. Later in life, he said that he was not physically harmed, but something inside him changed, a lingering fear, a sense of shame and confusion that he could not put into words. It was the first time Barry realized that the world beyond his family was not a safe place. During those years, The Gibb family clung tightly to one another. The children grew up in cramped rental houses, constantly moving from Chapel House to street, Catherine's Drive, then to Snell Road, before finally settling in Manchester. They never became homeless, but they never truly felt stable either. Amid that instability, Barry grew up with an incomplete childhood, carrying a constant sense of unease and an invisible pressure. If he could not turn all this pain into something meaningful, it would eventually swallow him whole. And it was within that pain that something quietly miraculous began to take shape. Music became Barry's only refuge. In the narrow lodging houses, Hugh's drums echoed every night, and the 6-year-old boy began to hum along as if whispering a prayer. He quickly realized that sound could drown out hunger, harmony could soothe fear, and a song could make the darkness less frightening. With Robin and Maurice by his side, the three brothers blended their voices in tiny rooms, creating harmonies that no one could have imagined would one day reach the entire world. In 1957, at just 11 years old, Barry formed his first band, the Rattlesnakes, with Robin, Maurice, and a few neighborhood boys. They were not chasing fame, they were searching for a way out of poverty. They sang Everly Brothers and Buddy Holly songs, filling small rooms with voices louder than their skinny bodies. Then one night, Barry's only guitar snapped in half. The sharp crack of breaking wood cut like a knife as if hope itself had broken. With no money to buy a new instrument, the band fell apart that very night. Still, Barry clung to music. Together with Robin and Maurice, now calling themselves the Bee Gees, they continued performing at talent contests where the prizes were often nothing more than a few slices of bread or a handful of coins. A major turning point came in 1958 when the Gibb family boarded the ship Fair Sea and emigrated to Australia. They left almost everything behind, carrying only a few old suitcases and a fragile dream. They departed England in poverty and arrived in Australia in poverty as well, but they did not yet know that it would be here that the name Bee Gees would officially be born, marking the beginning of a legend. In 1959, the three boys stood singing in the middle of Redcliffe Speedway. We sang between the races, with dust flying into our eyes and gasoline filling our lungs, Barry recalled. But when the three voices blended together, even the roar of the engines fell silent. The crowd turned back. They listened, not because of spectacle, but because it was music born of survival. By 1961, at the age of 15, Barry understood clearly. School would not save them. Music was their lifeline. I knew that if I stayed in school, we would starve, he said. And every night, he filled notebooks page after page, scribbling melodies like prayers, nurturing the dream of lifting his family out of poverty, one song at a time. The first turning point came in 1963, when the three brothers signed a contract with Festival Records in Sydney. But the road was far from smooth. They were dropped, pushed to a smaller label, and repeatedly dismissed by executives who looked down on them. Barry did not retreat. He wrote day and night, relentlessly, until radio stations, places that had once ignored them, were finally forced to listen. In 1966, the song I Was a Lover, a Leader of Men, won a major songwriting award. It was not merely a trophy. It was confirmation that the boy who once sang amid gasoline fumes at Redcliffe, the boy marked by scars and fear, had crossed the threshold into manhood, armed with music that demanded to be remembered. By 1967, the young man who had once sung over the sound of engines arrived in London. He carried with him a handful of worn demo tapes, but his faith remained intact. The three brothers met Robert Stigwood, a man who saw in them not only talent, but destiny. From the very first night, the Bee Gees became a force that could no longer be ignored. New York mining disaster, 1,941 shot straight up the charts. It sounds so striking that many listeners mistook it for the Beatles in disguise. Massachusetts, To Love Somebody followed, like prayers transformed into music. The world discovered a new voice of pain, and that voice belonged to Barry Gibb. But the stage lights only concealed what lay on the surface. Beneath it all, two brothers barely in their 20s were exhausted by constant flights, endless recording sessions, trapped inside a merciless fame machine. The harmony that had once saved them now became a battlefield. Robin, with his fragile ego and his high, trembling voice, sharp as a drawn string, began to feel overshadowed by Barry's innate authority as a leader. When the group chose 1st of May instead of beloved Lamplight, Robin was not just disappointed, he was shattered. I felt invisible, as if my voice no longer mattered. In 1969, he left the group. One of the three pillars of the Bee Gees collapsed, and with it, the House of Harmony fell apart. Although Barry tried to carry on with Maurice, the magic had faded. Alone, he plunged into a solo project, one whose very title whispered the doubt gnawing at his heart. It felt like the whole world was telling me I wasn't good enough without them. In 1988, I'll Kiss Your Memory, a gentle ballad, was released and quickly flopped. Barry's album, The Kid's No Good, was shelved soon after. For the first time, Barry tasted a brutal truth. Even talent cannot survive without the family harmony that once sustained it. Meanwhile, Robin pursued a solo path, carrying both pride and sorrow. We weren't just a band, we were brothers. And yet, at that time, I couldn't stand beside them. He thought leaving would bring freedom, but later admitted it felt more like exile. Between them, the atmosphere grew so cold that even a single breath seemed capable of shattering everything. Barry later recalled, his voice heavy, "We were still brothers, but we were no longer together." During that period, the Bee Gees drifted, exhausted, and directionless. From a band rising like a storm, they nearly vanished from the musical map. At the end of 1970, the Bee Gees officially reunited. They returned to the studio cautiously, like people who had wounded one another, yet were still bound closely enough to sit down and sing together once more. Out of that fragile reunion, How Can You Mend a Broken Heart was born. The song quickly climbed to #1 in the United States, delivering their first major victory on the land they had always dreamed of reaching. From that moment on, the Bee Gees' music took on a new tone, no longer bursting with ambition, but filled with the hollow spaces of separation. Each harmony became a fragment of memory. Each chorus echoed both love and regret. They were brothers bound together so tightly it hurt, and at times capable of hurting one another just as deeply. The music of this era carried the weight of division, as if they were redrawing their own map in search of a way back to each other. In 1974, they left England for Miami, the city of sunlight and rebirth. There, under the guidance of producer Arif Mardin, Barry stumbled upon the sound that would define his entire life: the falsetto. A desperate cry during rehearsal, seemingly meaningless, suddenly became an identity, a means of survival. It had just been created, and then suddenly it became who we were, Barry would later say. The falsetto did more than change the Bee Gees. It resurrected them from the ashes. A band once dismissed as a relic of the 1960s now exploded at the center of a new era. Hit after hit followed. Jive Talkin', You Should Be Dancing. Clubs erupted. Broadway trembled. Radio stations surrendered. By 1977, when the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack sold over 40 million copies, the Bee Gees were no longer merely a band. They had become a cultural phenomenon. Songs like Stayin' Alive, Night Fever, How Deep Is Your Love were no longer just songs. They were anthems that built an entire generation. For a time, Barry Gibb's falsetto was the most seductive sound in the world. But the disco crown was as heavy as a chain. Fame filled bank accounts, but hollowed out the spirit. Barry wrote relentlessly, Woman in Love for Barbra Streisand, Heartbreaker for Dionne Warwick. Islands in the Stream for Dolly Parton and Kenny Rogers. He was a hit-making machine. Yet behind the platinum records were sleepless nights, fractures within the family, and a fear no one dared to name. Were they slowly losing themselves? And then the empire collapsed. In 1979, the anti-disco movement swept across the United States in a frenzy, turning an entire musical era into a hunted target. Stadiums burned through the night as Bee Gees records were thrown onto bonfires like a ritual of collective execution. From celebrated icons, they became a laughingstock overnight. They wanted disco to die. And they wanted us to collapse along with it, Barry recalled bitterly. In 1981, the Bee Gees released Living Eyes with the hope of proving that they were more than just disco symbols of a bygone phase, that their music possessed depth and vitality far beyond the labels the public had imposed on them. But this time, everything fell apart too quickly. Audiences turned away, radio stations fell silent, the album failed almost immediately, and the very force that had once lifted them to the top of the world vanished without warning. For Barry, this was not merely a professional decline. It was the feeling of being betrayed by the very era he had once given everything to. When all the sleepless nights, the wounds, and the loneliness he had poured into music were ultimately repaid with a cold, merciless emptiness. Yet Barry did not stop. When the door for the Bee Gees closed, he quietly stepped behind the scenes and began writing hits for others. His name gradually disappeared from the charts. But in that silence, Barry's talent continued to burn steadfast, proud, and alone. But while Barry was quietly building glory for others, fate began to strip away the most precious things in his life. And the first pain came from the person he loved more than music itself. The first and most devastating loss in Barry Gibb's life was Andy Gibb, the youngest brother, 12 years his junior. But in Barry's heart, Andy was always more like a son than a sibling. He had once carried the boy on his shoulders, held him when he cried, placed a guitar into his tiny hands, and watched his eyes light up at the sound of music in that poor but loving home. Andy was my baby brother, as Barry always called him, but that love went far beyond blood. By the late 1970s, Andy was no longer running behind his older brothers. He became a phenomenon. I Just Want to Be Your Everything, shadow dancing, a radiant smile and a silk-soft voice that swept the world. And behind that spotlight stood Barry the songwriter, the producer, the one who pushed him into the light. But fame wrapped itself around Andy too early. At an age when others were still learning how to grow up, Andy was already living amid wealth, temptation, and loneliness. Drugs and alcohol, the shadows that always lurked behind fame, pulled him down little by little. Barry saw it all. He called, advised, took Andy to treatment, tried to hold him back when the current became too strong, and at times, guilt crushed him. Sometimes I think I pushed him too hard. On the 10th of March, 1988, just 5 days after his 30th birthday, Andy's heart stopped. Doctors called it myocarditis, but everyone knew the truth. Years of self-destruction had left his body exhausted. The news shattered Barry. The baby brother he had brought into the light was gone before his life had truly begun. That funeral felt like a cold incision. Barry stood motionless before Andy's portrait, his trembling hand resting on the frame as if trying to hold his brother back one last time. The man who had conquered stadiums with his voice could not utter a single sound that day, and for the first time, silence defeated him. Later, Barry said, "It doesn't matter how many people love you. If you don't love yourself, it all slips away." A lesson written in Andy's death. To the world, Andy was a teen idol gone too soon. To Barry, he was the brother he had promised to protect and the dream he could not save. On stage years later, every note still carried Andy's shadow. I will never stop thinking about him, and he never has. Andy's death was the first crack in the harmonious wall of the Gibb family and the opening sign of the darkest chapter in Barry's life. But tragedy did not stop there. In 1992, while Barry was still grappling with the emptiness Andy left behind, his father, Hugh Gibb, took his final breath. For Barry, it was the collapse of his emotional foundation. Hugh was not just his father, he was the first rhythm, the drumbeat echoing through thin walls and rented rooms, the silent promise that somehow the family would survive. Every drumbeat was a promise, Barry once said. And now, that rhythm was gone. Barbara, the mother who had buried her youngest child, now had to say goodbye to the man who had stood beside her through hunger and constant moving. Robin and Maurice bowed their heads, feeling yet another crack spread through the family's harmony. And Barry, as the eldest, understood that he now carried a different responsibility, to preserve not only the music, but also the memory of the man who first taught him how to find the rhythm of life. Still, it did not end there. Barry would go on to witness one brother after another pass away, as if fate were steadily stripping away the last remaining pieces of the Gibb family. Maurice's death came too fast, too suddenly, an unprepared blow. Maurice Gibb, long known as the glue that held the family together, entered a Miami hospital for what seemed like a simple stomach pain. But just hours later, doctors discovered a severe intestinal tumor and rushed him into surgery. While everyone was still hoping, Maurice's heart suddenly stopped. The stabilizing force of the Bee Gees, the one who brought laughter back when silence grew heavy, who pulled the brothers together when fame tried to tear them apart, was gone at 53. For Barry, it was a bolt from a clear sky. Maurice was not just a brother, he was the ground beneath Barry's feet, the stability the entire family leaned on. And overnight, that balance disappeared. Barry could not accept the cruelty of how quickly it happened, from stomach pain, to hospital, to surgery, to absolute silence. Later, his voice faltered as he admitted, "It was so sudden that I couldn't accept it." In the months that followed, Barry could not get used to the emptiness. In rehearsal rooms, he would instinctively glance toward where Maurice once sat, only to find an empty chair. On stage, familiar harmonies suddenly felt fragile, like a rug torn apart. And Barry understood. Music may endure, but those who create it do not. If Maurice's passing was a sudden lightning strike, Robin's death was like a slow eclipse, darkness creeping in day by day until it swallowed all the light. In the late 2000s, Robin was diagnosed with cancer of the colon and liver. At first, there was still hope, still treatment, still moments when his voice returned, fragile but defiant. Barry believed they might sing together one more time, but the illness was long and merciless. Robin grew thinner, weaker, his voice trembling, the eyes that once burned brightly now clouded with pain. Barry could only sit beside his hospital bed, gripping his brother's hand as if holding onto the final thread connecting them. He spoke of childhood, of songs written hastily in small rooms, of nights when three voices blended into one. Sometimes he softly hummed, "How deep is your love?" waiting for Robin to answer. But there was only silence. "We'll sing again," Barry promised, even though deep down he knew that silence would soon become eternal. Their history was not all light. In 1969, Robin had left the group after a painful misunderstanding. Barry recalled, "We were still brothers, but we were no longer together." Yet they found their way back, reconciled, forgave, and went on to write "How Can You Mend a Broken Heart?", a prophecy of their own future. On the 20th of May 2012, Robin passed away at the age of 62. To the public, it marked the closing of a legendary musical chapter. To Barry, it was the collapse of the final foundation. The Bee Gees had survived disco backlash, exhaustion, and separation, but they could not survive death. Robin's funeral was a sea of grief. Fans lined up holding vinyl records like talismans. The coffin moved forward to the sound of "I Started a Joke," a song once ironic, now sounding like a forewarning of fate. Barry stood motionless, staring at the coffin as if begging it to open, The falsetto that once soared highest in the world was silent. When the funeral ended, Barry stepped into an empty world. He was the last one left. To the public, that sounded like victory. To Barry, it was punishment. Back in Miami, every guitar leaning against the wall felt like a ghost. Every chord he played touched voices that would never harmonize with his again. "I feel like the last leaf on the tree," he said, a loneliness that pierced even the music. Then in 2016, his mother, Barry Gibb, also passed away quietly, without spectacle. Like a final chapter closing slowly in a life already filled with loss. For Barry, it was not just the loss of a mother. It was the loss of the last witness to the scarred little boy before he became a legend. She was the one who held him during the horrific burns at age 2, who stayed by his hospital bed for 2.5 months, who whispered encouragement when the family had nothing, who kissed every scar to remind him he was still her son, no matter how bright the stage outside might be, no matter how much it glorified him. Now, in this vast world, no one remembers that boy except Barry. He sits before old family photographs, turning each one with trembling hands, as if searching for himself in faces that have already gone. Sometimes he whispers something very small, very private, words only Barbara could hear and understand. The Bee Gees began with harmony, but now that harmony survives only through the perseverance of one man, and that is not a victory, because sometimes survival itself is the cruelest fate of all. And yet, even before all the losses that came later, love had once left him light as a blade, but sharp enough to leave the very first scar of his life. Before the world ever spoke the name Bee Gees, Barry was just a young man, barely in his 20s. He married Maureen Bates very early in life, at an age when people often confuse love with promises, infatuation with forever. It was not a loud marriage, nor did it come with sensational headlines. It began like so many young unions do. A modest home, mornings spent making tea, small conversations about tomorrow. But while Maureen longed for a stable, grounded life, the world began calling Barry in a very different way. The Bee Gees surged forward, charts trembled, and performance schedules filled to the brim. Night after night in recording studios, flights spanning continents, stages blazing with lights, everything gradually pulled him away from the kitchen, the sofa, and the woman who waited for him in silence. Day by day, the distance between them became more than just hours of air travel. It turned into an entirely different way of life. Fame began to slip in between them. Pressure from record labels, expectations weighing heavily on the shoulders of a band leader, rumors, temptations circling endlessly. Barry always seemed to be on stage, even after the front door closed. Conversations between husband and wife grew shorter, constantly interrupted by phone calls, schedules, and late-night recording sessions. The feeling of us slowly gave way to you and me, two parallel lines that no longer met at any common point. By 1970, as the Bee Gees were on their way to becoming a global phenomenon, Barry's first marriage quietly came apart. There was no explosive scandal, no dramatic confrontation. It was simply two young people pulled into different orbits, and one of them had never been meant to live alongside the glare of stage lights. For Barry, it was the first fall of his emotional life. He came to understand that fame does not only demand time and energy, but sometimes also takes away the very people who once held your hand before you had anything at all. It was the first and bitter lesson about the price of belonging to the world, while gradually losing the person standing right beside you. Yet amid that collapse, fate placed another woman on Barry's path, one who would walk with him through the final chapters of his life. Barry met Linda Gray in 1967 when he was standing in a strange in-between space, one hand touching glory, the other struggling to keep balance within himself. Linda was a model from Scotland, but what drew Barry to her was not her outward beauty. It was a rare sense of calm, something completely opposite to the world he was living in at the time. They married in 1970, the same year Barry's first marriage ended. It seemed like a moment full of contradictions. Outside, the Bee Gees were struggling amid shifting musical trends. Inside the home, Barry was beginning again with a new woman. But unlike his first marriage, Linda entered Barry's life with clear awareness. She was not marrying an ordinary man, but someone living in the eye of fame's storm. So instead of trying to pull him away from music, she chose to become the anchor that kept him from drifting too far. Over time, they had 5 children together, a large, noisy family, but a kind of noise Barry was always willing to trade any stage for. While he traveled endlessly on tours, recorded through sleepless nights, and sat through long meetings, Linda kept the rhythm at home, managing meals, sleep schedules, schooling, handling everything behind the scenes so Barry could stand at the front lines with peace of mind. There was no longer a lonely wife waiting in a silent house, because Linda understood one truth clearly. If Barry could not be a musician, he would no longer be himself. During the years when the Bee Gees were turned away by all of America in the anti-disco movement, when the slogan "Disco sucks" spread mockery everywhere, Barry faced not only commercial failure but also a deep sense of betrayal. It was then that Linda became the only windbreak wall he had. She did not speak loudly, did not go to the media to defend her husband. She simply stood beside him, quietly reminding him that a person's true worth is not measured by how often their name appears on the charts. Later, when losses began to arrive one after another, Linda's role went far beyond that of a wife. She was the only one who witnessed Barry collapse behind closed doors, when the stage lights went dark and the man once unbreakable behind the microphone could no longer finish a single sentence. She was the one who sat beside him through sleepless nights, when he could not listen to even one of his own songs without being crushed by memory. But even Linda's enduring love could not shield Barry from the weight of time and life's wounds. The greatest battles were no longer fought on stage, but within his own body and mind. In the early 1990s, his body began sending warnings. Decades of touring, sleepless nights in studios. The burden of carrying on for all 3 brothers, everything settled into his joints. Arthritis crept into his hands, his back, his legs, until even wearing a guitar became a challenge. In 1994, the Bee Gees were forced to cancel a tour. For fans, it was disappointment. For Barry, it was a blow to his pride. "I can't do it," he admitted quietly, as if confessing a sin. The man who once ignited stadiums now struggled simply to stand without pain. Then came the most terrifying fear of all. A severe stomach pain sent Barry to the hospital. Doctors warned of a possible intestinal blockage, the very shadow that had taken Maurice overnight. Lying beneath the blinding lights of the operating room, his hand trembling as he signed the consent form, he turned to Linda and whispered, "I can't go like Maurice did." He survived. But from then on, every ache, every cough became a reminder that fate could knock at any moment. Even the falsetto voice that once changed the history of pop music was no longer invincible. Notes that once soared now wavered and broke. In rehearsals, Barry often stopped midway. Frustration etched across his face as he stared into the empty space where his voice once rose like magic. He was still Sir Barry Gibb, still deeply respected, but in the mirror he saw only a man wondering whether time had finally stolen that magic. And he chose not to surrender. Barry clung to small rituals, morning walks along Miami's shoreline to remind himself that life still flowed, gentle exercises for his joints, afternoons returning to the studio, where pain temporarily gave way to melody. Linda remained his anchor, reminding him of the scars, of the stiffening back when the weather turned cold, but also reminding him that he was still here, that his voice still existed. Even a trembling voice was no longer a sign of weakness, but proof that he had survived everything. Grandchildren surrounded him with laughter, pulling him back from the abyss. "Music is therapy," Barry said. "That's how I keep going." Today, Barry lives quietly beside Linda, the woman who has walked with him for more than half a century, who never allowed him to slip into the darkness that swallowed his brothers. Around them, the family they built continues to grow. Stephen, the eldest son, became a guitarist and songwriter and has toured with his father. Ashley and Travis followed musical paths in their own ways. Michael chose a life away from the spotlight. Alexandra, the youngest, grew up shielded from fame's darker corners while maintaining a close bond with her father. Their grandchildren run through the halls of the Miami home, filling the space with the very sounds that once defined the Bee Gees: rhythm, laughter, small, tentative melodies. Barry often says that his greatest joy now is no longer platinum records, but watching his grandchildren discover music on their own. For Barry, family is no longer just four young men standing around a single microphone. It is Linda, his children, his grandchildren, the ones who keep the harmony called Gibb from ever fading. What endures most is not only the music, but the meaning behind it. Barry Gibb is not merely the last surviving brother. He is the final witness to a harmony that once belonged to four voices. He has buried three brothers and a mother. Each loss left wounds deeper than any applause could ever soothe. Yet he continues to sing, carrying the sound of a family torn apart by fate but forever bound together through music. And as long as Barry still breathes, that harmony remains not as a chorus of three or four voices, but as the sound of one man carrying an entire legacy with his own heart. When we look back on Barry Gibb's life, we see not only the journey of a star, but the story of a man who survived fire, betrayal, and the funerals of his own family and still chose to keep singing. Nearing the age of 80, Barry Gibb no longer needs more fame. Yet the songs he left behind continue to reach hearts that have never met him in person, continue to carry someone through a lonely night, continue to speak the pain we cannot name. That is the final victory of a lifetime as an artist. If Barry's story has touched you, if the music of the Bee Gees has ever been part of your memories, please press like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. That is how you can walk with us as we continue telling true life stories where behind every halo of fame are scars no one sees.